The first and oldest image of the state is the mythical. Man in the archaic past, not unlike modern man, tried to read meaning into his world. While we are used to an anthropocentric, materialistic, and scientific worldview, in their stories, myth is the Greek word for story, about the origin and history of the world, we find proto-scientific explanations juxtaposed to historical events and fundamental moral truths, all wrapped up in a fine narrative. Two principal approaches self-impose on the observer: inside out and outside in. While the first begins with the known and explains the unknown in terms of the familiar, the second explains the familiar as only a small part of forces superior to man. Whether we generalize the key features of our atomic world to better imagine the cosmos, or see our world confirmed in a cosmic constellation, might eventually be of little consequence, as long as we feel comfortable in a world that appears at first incomprehensible, or at least outlandish and fragmented. The myth glosses over inconsistencies and ruptures which we just can't explain away because they do exist logically and or empirically. A common and fairly consistent way of explaining the outer world is the quantitative approach. We simply increase the numbers to such an extent that their sheer bigness suggests greatness and superiority. This may be underpinned by magical numbers and their multiples. 4, the four corners of the world, is more meaningful than, say, 5, but 4 times 4 is even more impressive. Most creation myths operate with numbers, often in combination with magical numbers, when they describe the incomprehensible. Numbers and dimensions are also relevant to politics, and not just in democracy. Castles and palaces are impressive buildings. A good example is the word pharaoh, originally meaning great house and describing the royal palace. Location, space, size, angle, architecture, all underline the outstanding significance of their uses seen from the perspective of the ordinary man. The impression of power can easily be reinforced by function, uniforms, and weapons. What counts is the gap between the inner circle and the outside. While projection is one common way of justifying power, a second, but probably even more important way, we could call it passive legitimization, because it defines the situation before men act upon it. We can find in focusing. The external cosmic order, seen as comprehensive and good, gives guidance to the internal order of human society. If the big picture exhibits perfection, beauty, even goodness, would it make sense to rebel against this order? Shouldn't man rather imitate such perfect order in the expectation to achieve the same alleged qualities? And indeed, the terminology of power abounds with parallels between the cosmic order and the political order. Both are represented as hierarchies, if not trinity. Both are presided over by a Lord ruler. Both are dominated by forces. In both we see a concentration of energy on top rather than at the bottom. Both claim moral qualities like goodness or justness, and superhuman qualities like strength, excellence, reasonability. Dignitaries are often placed in higher positions so that we have to look up to them. Hold scepter, staff or orb, wear a crown, sit on a throne, etc. Star and cross, in combination or separately, are common symbols of heavenly power as are sun and moon. Mathematical symbols, especially triangle and circle, also point to the stars. Such symbols are often found in combination with mighty beasts: elephant, lion, tiger, bear, eagle. All these symbols convey holiness, sacrosanctity, wisdom, strength, and thus legitimacy unto people of power. It is difficult to imagine power to exist without its continuous reenactment. That is expected from symbols and rituals. A second explanation, also very common and in a way easily understandable, is the anthropomorphic image of the state. We can distinguish between three views: the organic, the anthropocentric, and the hereditary views. The first corresponds more easily with a hierarchical understanding of how society is organized, because it distinguishes between various functions. The brain controls the body, the limbs execute orders, and organs, stimulated by commands issued by the brain, watch over the well-being of the entire body. We can say that this corresponds with the way, say, a feudal society is organized. Top down, with a monarch on top, with a thin layer of executives, and further down a large number of, let's call them organs, and finally the individual cells. This quasi-natural view shows a proto-scientific understanding of the body, but its holistic view deprives us of viable alternatives. Would a rebellion of one organ against another make sense? Hardly. The body would destroy itself, which would also go against the will of God. The second view draws concentric circles around man and builds patterns of interactions based on resemblance. Like the family corresponds to the community corresponds to the state. A patriarchal or matriarchal family resembles a monarchy. A fraternal or sororal family could be compared with an oligarchy. And an egalitarian family obviously matches democracy. These analogies suggest a natural extension of the smaller to the larger unit. The state, its roots and various branches, is merely the known and trusted family writ large. The structure is the same. The values to respect and defend are the same. The power distribution is the same. Only size is different. The third view could be visualized as a chain. Until about the French Revolution, there had been much emphasis on learning by imitation. children, by obeying their father and loving their mother, learn the social codex that they later in their lives practiced and passed on to their children. The values that they internalized were no different from the values of other families or from society as a whole. That helped to bridge the hiatus between state, still in the form of personal government, and society. The more so since society and the individual cells that composed it were vertically organized, so that the line Father, King, God was seen as natural rather than artificial. Despite sporadic outbursts of discontent, the order itself was rarely called in question. Last but not least, because it then would have to be replaced by a different form of order and legitimacy for which there was a deficit of both practical and theoretical models to follow. The three views sketched above apply more easily to stratified social structures than to horizontal or egalitarian ones. However, it should not be ignored that even in a highly egalitarian order, archaic structures sediment. No social engineering has ever succeeded in completely eradicating differentiation. We can soundly assume that it is futile to create the homo novum, although numerous attempts were made during the past century. Not only would we have to re-engineer man, we would also have to strip him of his history and self-awareness. The next explanation demonstrates that the road to identity between individual and state is paved by the collective.